Hello, and welcome to this episode of Office of the Patriot, where we try to make sense out of the nonsense of the progressive left and rhino right. I'm your host, Myron Ybarra, and with me today is Angry Mike. How's it going, Mike?
I'm feeling pretty hopeful. Let's make America healthy again.
Agreed. That's the spirit and the goal. When I was a kid back in the 70s, my mom, she was a stay-at-home mom. She was responsible for taking care of the house and preparing meals and making sure that my brothers and I never really got into too much trouble. She was pretty good at her job. As a kid, I remember going to the grocery store with her, and given that my father, he didn't really make a lot of money as a sergeant in the United States Air Force, she really had to stretch every dollar. Back then, the way you would stretch your dollar is to buy everything fresh. Fresh vegetables, fresh meat, bulk bags of rice and beans and potatoes. I remember a head of cauliflower cost 10 cents and a pound of green beans was about 25 cents. My father never made enough money to buy any frozen or most canned vegetables unless it was veg-all. But as I look back, I found that we were all as healthy as horses, and we seldom got sick or had any type of food allergy. Hell, we didn't even have or know anyone who had any food allergies. But that's all changed, and thanks to the biochemical and pharmaceutical industries. And in this episode of Office of the Patriot, we're going to uncover the dirty little secret of the food industry and, well, hopefully, make America healthy again. Have any of you ever grabbed a large boulder or limb and flipped it over just to see what's lurking under there? Maybe you were expecting to find or weren't expecting to find much, maybe a bug or two, and then all of a sudden you flip that limb over and 50 critters, bugs, lizards, and everything else goes scattering all over the place. Well, this topic did exactly that for me. I was under the impression before I started researching this topic that chemical and pharmaceutical industries were the big reason for the introduction of a lot of these preservatives and food processing techniques that could have detrimental effect based off of the chemicals that are used to process and preserve food. But I was wrong. Well, not completely wrong. They do bear some of the responsibility of developing and providing the chemicals, but the fault actually falls into the lap of the food producers. So a little history is in order. Through the 19th century, food producers primarily use natural preservation techniques to minimize spoilage. They would use salt, or they would smoke stuff, or ice. And canning were all fine for small production. And given that cities were few and far between, food production was close to the end user. And cities didn't have near the population they do now, so the low-tech preservation and processing worked. However, as more people moved to the cities and less people lived in the rural areas, to provide the food producers had to come up with more ingenious ways to preserve the food to get it to the cities before it spoiled. So in comes the pharmaceutical and biochemical companies, primarily at that time Dow and Monsanto. Some of the earlier chemicals that were produced to minimize spoilage included formaldehyde or formalin for meat and dairy, and copper sulfate for fruits and vegetables to kill bacteria and to keep food looking fresh for longer periods. But these chemicals and others like them can have detrimental effects when to our health, when they're consumed.
With mass distribution across the country, food manufacturers were running into the problem of how to keep their products fresh for market and how to do so at the lowest possible cost.
You didn't even have refrigeration. It hadn't been really determined how to preserve things in a way that would keep them marketable for a long period of time. There was canning, but that didn't work for everything. So what were you supposed to do?
Increasingly, companies were turning to the burgeoning chemical industry for answers. By 1901, companies like Dow and Monsanto had introduced a host of new chemicals to the food supply.
There's preservative discoveries. Formaldehyde, the ability to synthesize formaldehyde. There's copper sulfate, which is a heavy metal, is used to turn vegetables greener when they're canned.
Copper sulfate in particular was one that was used for a very long time. It went into green peas and it went into pickles. Anything that needed to look bright and fresh, copper sulfate went into it.
In the 19th century, most food was still real. And then the 20th century saw the process of food going from real to something that no one had ever seen before.
It'd be wonderful to think that there was this Eden back in American history where everything was free range and organic and perfect, but in the 19th century, as more and more Americans were leaving the farm and now living in cities, they had lost this direct and intimate connection with their food.
So let me preface what I say on this podcast with this. I injured my low back in 2010, and about a year into my rehab, I dove into the topic of personal health. You kind of remember when I started getting into that.
I do.
And I would regularly spend, 3 to 4 hours per night or per day, soaking up knowledge. A lot of that time was spent investigating the food supply and the nutrition in general. And we could easily spin this podcast into a weekly health show just covering, nutrition, but that's really not the purpose of this podcast. While I'm not an accredited health expert, I would say with confidence that, I have an impressive amount of knowledge on the subject. Overall, I'm still learning. Every day I do a little bit of research, almost every day. So if anybody's interested, please reach out to me because, like I said, we don't have time to cover everything. I'd be happy to talk about what I know one-on-one. And, if you have stuff that you could share with me, that's awesome. I love learning. So in regards to, the history of how the biochemical companies became involved in our food supply, in my opinion, I think all fingers point to greed overall. How can they maximize profits? So they maximize profits by, introducing, like you said, the introduction of preservatives to reduce the food spoilage and reuse waste, or the byproduct of other forms of manufacturing to save money. So that's it in a nutshell. Crony capitalism, corporations using regulations and other forms, of support to enrich themselves, really.
Agreed. But it's not just greed for money. It's greed for power they crave. You would think that having chemicals in food would be something that the Food and Drug Administration, more commonly known as the FDA, would absolutely frown on. But that's far from the truth. Currently, there are over 10,000 direct and indirect chemical additives in our food supply that are blessed by the FDA.
There are more than 10,000 chemicals and additives allowed in food in the U.S., often in small amounts, but many have not been evaluated by the FDA in decades. The majority are safe, but some chemicals allowed here have been banned overseas after research has linked them to cancer and developmental or behavioral issues.
We need to put the F back into the Food and Drug Administration.
Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky introduced a bill requiring the FDA to review certain chemicals that are banned overseas and to close what's known as the grass loophole, chemicals generally recognized as safe. This allows companies to skip an extensive safety review when adding many new chemicals to food.
Is the food industry basically policing itself?
I would say yes. And when you look around the world and you see what other countries are doing to protect their consumers, we are far behind.
I didn't even think we had 10,000 different types of food, let alone 10,000 different types of chemicals for our food. Now, if you're like me, you're probably wondering how the hell did the FDA go through over 10,000 different types of chemicals to determine whether or not they're safe for human consumption? Well, they didn't. Well, they didn't for the most part, because in 1958, the FDA was given a pass by Congress under the Food Additives Amendment. Prior to this law, in order for a food additive to be approved for use, it would have to go through and approval process, which required long-term testing and review by the FDA. Generally not something that most food producers are interested in undergoing. One of the last chemicals to get FDA approval was BHT and BHA, which is still used in foods in the United States, primarily in baked goods and flour, despite many European countries outlawing the addition of these preservatives. Anyway, this new law introduced the concept of GRAS, which means generally recognized as safe. And I don't know about you, but anytime a government bases their law on vague wording, you can be assured that it was done in the name of corporate greed and or political power, to my earlier point. So the FDA put a number of chemicals on the GRAS list. If a chemical or food additive was on the GRAS list, food producers didn't have to go through any approval process, which allowed them a fair amount of autonomy. So now let's jump forward to 1997, where Congress introduced an amendment to the GRAS legislation called the GRAS Notification Program. And this is where food production gets really sinister. As opposed to the two programs that the FDA used for approval, allowing new ingredients on the GRAS list, a third option was offered. In this option, if you're a manufacturer or chemical company and you come up with a new food preservative or food enhancing chemical that you want to have added to the GRAS list, all you need to do is conduct your research and then send your research to a third-party lab that has no affiliation with the FDA. And if they sign off on your new ingredient, it will be added to the GRAS list. And that's why we have over 10,000 new chemicals in our food supply. This also changes the FDA from a proactive agency to a reactive one, meaning, according to the FDA, if no one's getting sick, then all's well. But that can't be farther from the truth. Oftentimes, some of these chemicals or additives require a significant amount of time to manifest themselves as toxic to humans. And by that time, you have thousands of people being irreparably injured. Mike?
Yeah, it's pretty sad. And again, as I stated previously, I have a lot of knowledge on the subject in my tiny brain. So a lot of people may know it, but a lot of people may not. But a good rule of thumb is, simply put, stick to whole foods. So that's the moniker, taken up by the people that started Whole Foods Corporation. And it was unfortunately bought by Amazon several years ago, and it's gone downhill quite a bit. But the monikers, it makes perfect sense. Stick to whole foods. You're avoiding, as many preservatives as possible. So, but back to the topic of chemicals that are used as preservatives and coloring agents and flavor enhancers. Honestly, it's an ongoing battle just to try to discern what is okay, or like you said, on the GRAS list that generally recognize a safe list, and what is potentially harmful, or somewhat harmful. So you kind of have to do your own research constantly. You're always battling the latest acronyms and terms that are using. So you have to do a lot of research. Like I said, whole foods are best, but the good rule of thumb is if a product contains, more than like 4 or 5 ingredients, then you should really scrutinize all the ingredients that are in this list. Top of mind, food colorings or dyes are highly underrated in terms of toxicity. We could go into that subject. That could take up a whole podcast by itself too. A lot of these will kill birds and small animals, even if ingested in small amounts. They're well known to cause cancer, allergies, and a host of other, physical problems. And then we got seed oils. That's another subject we could do a whole podcast on. That's, another form of toxic substances that should be avoided at all costs. It's just now coming to the forefront. A lot of people are learning about it. And we could spend an entire podcast just talking about, healthy versus, toxic fats and oils. But, do yourself a favor and do your own research. The information is out there.
Yes, it is. Now, all of this might seem hopeless, but in reality, it's not. There's been a number of advocates for food and pharmaceutical safety in the media for years. But one voice in particular was recently recognized following his suspension of his presidential campaign, and that person is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., more commonly known as RFK Jr. One of RFK Jr.'s campaign promises was to make America healthy again, MAHA for short. And given that how he supports Donald Trump's campaign and candidacy, he has an even larger audience for this issue. I'll just let him tell you about the plan. And as a reminder, all of our sources are linked in the description section below.
Hey everyone, I'm here today to tell you how we can make America healthy again. And the first thing you need to do is get one of these hats, and we need everybody walking around and wearing it everywhere they go. But that's not going to be nearly enough. That's why I'm partnering with President Donald Trump to transform our nation's food, fitness, air, water, soil, and medicine. Our big priority will be to clean up the public health agencies like CDC, NIH, FDA, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Those agencies have become sock puppets for the industries that they're supposed to regulate. President Trump and I are going to replace the corrupt industry-captured officials with honest public servants. We're going to steer resources to meet our nation's biggest health challenge, chronic disease. We're going to identify its root cause, and we're going to eliminate those exposures. We're going to get toxic additives and pesticide residues out of our food. We're going to support the tens of millions of Americans who choose alternative and complementary medicine. We're going to become, once again, the healthiest nation on earth. That's what we mean by MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. If you want to support this vision, you can buy MAHA merch or donate to our website at mahanow.org.
Make America healthy again.
And make no mistake, this is a huge issue. Let's be honest here. We can survive without energy, and we can survive without transportation. Hell, we can even survive without Netflix, but that would be difficult. But we cannot survive without water, food, and air. And the problem is we have, as a nation, taken these things for granted. And whenever you take something for granted and you're not paying attention, the evil people, in this case, the deep state Democrats and their donors, will do whatever they can to control these commodities, even if it means hurting the people that rely on them. RFK Jr. has a pretty simple plan. He's not talking about doing away with any of these regulatory agencies, although I don't think that's a bad idea in and of itself. At least some of these agencies, because in my opinion, there's quite a bit of overlap. But he's committed to doing away with, in his words, the bureaucratic sock puppets of the chemical, pharmaceutical, and food producer agencies, or food producers that control these agencies, and replacing them with people who have America's best interest at heart. I would like to see him maybe go a step further. I would like to see regulations softened up for community food production again, much like the Amish did before our federal government stepped in and made it almost impossible for them to produce their own meat, dairy, and vegetables to feed their communities.
Yeah, nothing makes me more excited, honestly. And I really am excited about this. Is another Trump presidency, including a lot, the host of impressive group of influential people to help him tackling not just this subject, but two of the most important subjects affecting all of us, in my opinion. The first one, top of mind, is government deficit, with Elon Musk tapped to be the guy to rein that in. But here we're talking about, RFK Jr., who's, I think he's probably the most well-known and outspoken and passionate supporters of health and nutrition right now, bringing it, to the forefront and into politics, which is great. So this dude is 70 years old, and he's in better shape than most guys half his age. He's ripped. But, aside from that, it's not about body image. He almost looks like he's done some steroids or something, because he's pretty pumped, but he's just in really good health. So to me, health is paramount, and the health of, children and the youngest adults among us. That's paramount to the prosperity of our nation moving forward. We have to have people healthy. And I've always thought about, the term, my body is my temple. It's pretty simple to think about, and it's not really sacrilegious to say that, I don't think. Because to me, it means, you got to take care of your own body, because it truly is the only thing in the world that you have 100% control over. So think about it. That makes sense. And I can't understate how important it is to have a person with RFK's knowledge and passion leading this effort. Honestly, this gives me goosebumps to think about how much better our nation would be and what a beacon of hope we would, once again become.
And I thought I was the one who gave you goosebumps. In all seriousness, every second of time moves us all a little closer to our end, and it's a sobering thought. But there are ways that we can not only extend our time, but make it more productive, more fulfilling. To do that, we need to be healthy so we can be at our best. And some of the ways to do this could include adopting some of the old ways of food production and distribution, critically looking at the negative effects of direct and indirect introduction of chemicals into our food and water supply, and giving as much attention, and what I mean by attention is money, to preventative homeopathic medicine as we do to modern medicine. And above all else, voting for Trump. All of these things would be a huge step in making America healthy again. This concludes today's episode of Office of the Patriot.
And once again, if you've enjoyed this presentation, please take the time to like, subscribe, and share the channel on your social media, and comment as much as possible. It's very much appreciated.
Agreed. Also, again, please take the time to comment. Viewer engagement via comments is a major metric for channel accessibility on most social media platforms like YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, etc. And the more people that like, subscribe, and comment, the more this channel will come up when social and political content like this is searched for. And as always, have a blessed day and stay safe out there.